On the draw, this hand is fine. Um, got 3 different removal spells slash burn spells. Looks like our opponent is on a blue-white deck, so could be blue-white flash, could be a more controlling blue-white deck, hard to say. But whenever I see port down nowadays, I definitely am thinking probably up against blue-white flash. So we actually drew Thermo Alchemist here, which is a card we can play instead of the Storm Chaser Mage, and I think I like that better. Um, so I'm going to run out the Mage, although, sorry, going to run out the Alchemist, even though I believe that it could get Reflector Maged. Of course, that's definitely a vulnerability. And speak of the devil, there's the Reflector Mage. So that's kind of unfortunate. So we're going to now play the Storm Chaser Mage. We have the choice if we want to attack or not. I think we're fine with just making this attack. It is 1 damage versus our opponent's 2, but our opponent could have a number of ways of interacting with this Storm Chaser Mage, so I like just getting in the damage. And we'll see if our opponent just passes and represents something like a Spell Queller, or if a card like Gideon is going to come down. Though we do have the means in our hand of pressuring a Gideon, so I think we want to play our Thermo Alchemist right now. And we'll see if this meets something like a Spell Queller or not. So it is going to meet a Spell Queller. So we could unsubstantiate it, but I think we want to actually let the Spell Queller resolve and then Incendiary Flow away the Queller right now. So we're just going to neatly deal with it. Our opponent doesn't have mana for something like a Rattle Chains, which is nice. So we're going to get to cast this Thermo Alchemist, and now our Storm Chaser Mage is 2 power because we didn't attack with it before using that Incendiary Flow. So we've got a nice board here. This Stasis Snare is probably going to go after the Alchemist. Yep, I agree with that play rather than going for the Mage. I think the Alchemist is the bigger problem. Not that, but they're both problems for our opponent, for sure. So we can play our second Storm Chaser Mage here. And now we've got a little bit of a decision. We could just attack with only 1 and leave 1 back for blocks. We could also Lightning Axe away the Reflector Mage. So that's an option, but we don't really want to do that this turn, so I think we just attack with 1 Storm Chaser Mage. Because we really want to get this Wandering Fumarole down, see what our opponent does, hold up, unsubstantiate. Our opponent's got 3 cards in hand. We want to hold the Lightning Axe for something like Archangel Avacyn, which our opponent could have in hand. Alright, well, here's a Stasis Snare. And it looks like that is going to target our Storm Chaser Mage. Now, what we can do is we can use the Unsubstantiate to bounce our own Mage. And I think we do want to do that here to save it from the Stasis Snare. And we can always replay it on our next turn and give it haste. So it's not a neat little play. This is going to mean that the Reflector Mage can come in. So we're pretty much forced to take this hit from the mage. And here's a Selfless Spirit, okay. So the mountain is not a particularly strong draw here. So we can redeploy the Storm Chaser Mage, and then Galvanic Bombardment away the Selfless Spirit. Now I think we still want to save the Lightning Axe for Avacyn, because we are ahead in this race. I don't think Lightning Axing away the Reflector Mage is worth it. So we're just going to get in there for 4 damage and pass. So it's going to be 12 apiece. So this is a race, even though we're a bit ahead. Our opponent's got 3 cards in hand. And it looks like it's just going to pass the turn. So I like playing our land and then suiting up the Wandering Fumarole. This is a turn that our opponent definitely could have Avacyn, but we have the answer if that's the case. So I like getting in with the team. And so now with the trigger on the stack, we are going to be able to blow our opponent out a little bit by Lightning Axing away the Avacyn. And we are going to, of course, switch the power and toughness of the Wandering Fumarole. So this is going to end up being 8 damage, actually, which is a pretty big swing. So it's going to bring our opponent all the way down to 4. However, we are hellbent here. Our opponent's got 3 cards in hand. We don't have... We've used up all of our resources. So that is a little bit scary. Our opponent's now passing, which could mean something like another Archangel Avacyn. However, this Incendiary Flow was a great draw. So I like here just getting in the air with both of our creatures. And so it looks like our opponent's just going to take the damage. We could cast this Incendiary Flow here, but our opponent's got 2 cards in hand. It's hard to really see a reason to want to do that, so I think we just pass here. And that's going to do it for the first game. Okay. So always feels good to take the first one. But we're definitely going to have to strategize here for game 2 and think about how we want to maneuver for this matchup. So a card like Fevered Visions, it's just simply a lot worse on the draw. That's the unfortunate part of the card. Lightning Axe is... We saw it's a reasonable removal spell. Negate is fine. It can counter something like a Gideon, which is nice. Bedlam Reveler is a way to refuel. So I think I like transforming a bit here. Taking out the Fever Visions on the draw, as well as Unsubstantiate. We could even take out Chandra. So just looking at the cards we potentially want to take out, these are some of them. Lightning Axe is definitely a card we may want to have back, at least one more. Bedlam Reveler also works with this plan, as does Negate. We may want to have a couple negates on the draw. So let's try this transformational sideboard plan here for game 2 with the full 3 copies of Bedlam Reveler. So, and it looks like we need to bring one more card in here. So yeah, we'll board in 3 negates and see how this goes. So we've got a lot of removal, plus these Bedlam Revelers to really refuel here. So this is the type of hand that we are looking for. We're looking to play a little bit of a grindy game, kind of like game 1. And we're not going to be dealing 20 too quickly this time around. We don't have a 2-drop, which is a bit unfortunate. And our opponent's got Smuggler's Copter. Smuggler's Copter is a pretty good one. We've got a land we can play here to potentially go double Galvanic Bombardment depending on what our opponent plays. So it is a Thraben Inspector. So what we can do, our opponent's going to go to crew the Copter. We can go Galvanic Bombardment the Inspector. Then we have a Galvanic Bombardment in our graveyard. And we can Galvanic Bombardment the Copter. But we don't know that our opponent's even going to take this line and crew the Copter. Our opponent might choose not to do that. But it looks like our opponent is going to crew the Smuggler's Copter here. So what we're going to do is Galvanic Bombardment the Thraben Inspector. And then we can take care of the Copter as well. So our opponent is up on that exchange because of that clue, but that's okay. And here's a follow-up Thraben Inspector. So now we have a bit of a choice in terms of what to do this turn. Our opponent's still got 4 cards in hand. We could cast this Tormenting Voice, but seems like it might be best off to wait until next turn. So I think I like actually just sending this Incendiary Flow at our opponent, even though that is definitely a little bit aggressive. So we're going to take the 1 from the Thraben Inspector, and now we can Tormenting Voice, discarding the Fiery Temper. So we're going to do that. And we have the choice, once again, whether we want to go after our opponent or this Thraben Inspector. I think we just go after our opponent again. And now we filled up our graveyard nicely so that this Bedlam Reveler, once we are hellbent, it's going to be pretty good. So we're just we've kind of transformed into this burn deck. Looks like our opponent's a little bit mana screwed, potentially. So here's a land. So our opponent's got 7 cards in hand, so we could actually just cycle out all of those cards, which I kind of like doing. And then we're going to, of course, hit our opponent for 3 and get rid of a Thraben Inspector with the Collective Defiance. We could also play the Thermo Alchemist, but I think, or we could get in with the Wandering Fumarole. So we definitely have a few different options here, but I think that our best option is to go with the Collective Defiance, with all 3 modes being used. So our opponent's pretty likely to have a lot of spells, considering they've been stuck on mana, which is why I like making them discard them all. And this is also going to bring our opponent down to 11. So yeah, we see just a ton of spells hitting the graveyard. Reflector Mage, 3 Reflector Mages, Avacynth, Stasis Snare, and Linvala, and Spell Shrivel. So had we played something like a Thermo Alchemist, it would have given our opponent the perfect opportunity to Reflector Mage, as it turns out. Now, our opponent still got 7 cards in hand, but probably has more lands now. So, bit of a decision here this turn, what we want to do. Our opponent's got a lot of mana available, which is definitely a little bit scary. So I think we just go ahead and attempt to play the Thermo Alchemist, knowing that our opponent could have a Spell Queller for it. So we'll see if our opponent opts to Spell Queller this Thermo Alchemist or not. Now, we want to wait to use the Bedlam Reveler until we're Hellbent. So what we can do is allow the Spell Queller to resolve. Our Thermo Alchemist gets exiled. We can actually pitch the Collective Defiance to the Lightning Axe and just play Bedlam Reveler this turn, which I kind of like because it's the most mana efficient play. Even though our Collective Defiance is pretty good and we didn't really want to discard it, I think it's worth it. So, yep, we're going to go ahead, get rid of the Queller, discard the Collective Defiance, and this is going to set up the Bedlam Reveler. Although it looks like our opponent had Dispel there, which is pretty unfortunate, but we're still able to cast the Bedlam Reveler, draw 3, and pass here with another Bedlam Reveler to gas back up. And so we've got stuff we can do here. Unfortunately, though, our Thermo Alchemist is tucked underneath this Spell Queller. So, not the best spot, but definitely, I think we're still favored to win the game. There's a Stasis Snare. That's going to get rid of our Bedlam Reveler, which is a bit unfortunate. And there's a Selfless Spirit. The Selfless Spirit can protect the Spell Queller. Although we drew Incendiary Flow. Okay. So our opponent's got 3 cards in hand. We have this Collective Defiance, which we kind of want to use, but we also want to get this Thermo Alchemist into play. So I kind of like going ahead and trying to Incendiary Flow the Spell Queller. The only issue with that is that that's going to mean the flow isn't going to be directed at our opponent's face. All right, so we're gonna play the Alchemist and then try to flow the Spell Queller, which is basically just gonna be another way of getting rid of this Selfless Spirit. But then next turn, hopefully, we can get our Alchemist back. All right, so at least now we have a Thermo Alchemist in play. We know that our opponent doesn't have many Reflector Mages left in their deck, and we're still at a reasonable life total. So one advantage to making that play is that we just simply get rid of one of our opponent's more important cards. So I think now we may want to go for the Collective Defiance play, but we do have to be worried that our opponent could have Archangel Avacyn, which would definitely be unfortunate if our opponent does have Avacyn here. So it's definitely a decision. Our opponent could also have another Spell Queller, but I think we want to play this Bedlam Reveler this turn pretty badly. So I like the play of going for this Collective Defiance. Let's go for it. So hopefully it works out, but it's pretty unlikely to work out the way we want it to. So we're going to try to get rid of the Spell Queller and then deal our opponent 3 damage. And we are going to... The nice thing about this play is that even if our opponent plays Avacyn here, then we would still be okay with it. But it looks like it's going to be Spell Queller instead. So the Spell Queller is pretty annoying. But we're going to follow up here with another copy of Bedlam Reveler. And it looks like our opponent has a Spell Shrivel for it, so that is pretty darn good. So that Spell Shrivel was real bad for us. So now our opponent can attack us down to 10, and we'll see if our opponent has an additional follow-up here or not. So with 2 cards in hand, we have to be pretty worried about what they could potentially be, but at the same time we don't have much of a choice, so we're just going to fire up our Wandering Fumarole here. Hope that our opponent does not have a flash creature, even though we are playing against the blue-white flash deck. So it looks like our opponent did not have anything there, so that's good news. That's going to bring our opponent down to 5. And it's a close game. So our opponent's got 2 Spell Quellers with 2 of our key spells locked underneath them. It looks like our opponent found a Westphale Abbey. So the Quellers are going to come in again. That's going to put us down to 6. And now our opponent can make creature tokens with the Westphale Abbey to chump block. Although we drew Storm Chaser Mage here. So I kind of like just playing the Storm Chaser Mage. Although we could just activate the Wandering Fumarole. Unfortunately, we didn't. The reason why I didn't play this land, and I should say that, we want to have 1 card in hand in case we draw Tormenting Voice. But now, I think the situation has changed a little bit. So I think we just go ahead and make the same play that we did last turn. Our opponent's probably going to make the 1/1 here. If they have Avacyn, then we would just lose. So the 1/1 is going to get produced there. Now we can play our land so that next turn we can also play the Storm Chaser Mage. So if our opponent has Gideon here and is able to make an emblem, that would also be lethal. Interestingly enough, we have yet to see Gideon actually show up here. So the clue is going to get popped. Pretty obvious that our opponent doesn't immediately have it. And okay, so here's the 4 coming through. So we're actually, even though we're at 2, we've still got a lot of ways to win. One of them is just our Storm Chaser Mage and getting in with that. The other is drawing something like we did draw in the Collective Defiance. So I think we want to just play this Storm Chaser Mage first. And it looks like that's going to be enough to take the match.